Remember that President Trump said if Mueller looked at his finances, he would blow up the entire investigation, which tells us precisely where we need to go. We've got to follow the money. And every day now we are confronted with news about how the president has indeed converted the government of the United States into an instrument of self-enrichment.
That Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, he's one of the Democrats sitting in the Judiciary Committee, and he supports impeachment. As you heard from Raskin, House Democrats, they're broadening the scope of their impeachment inquiry to include possible corruption and also self-enrichment by this president. Now, two separate House committees, they've demanded documents relating to Vice President Mike Pence's recent stay at a Trump resort in Ireland, and also Trump's statements touting his Doral property in Miami as a possible site for the next G7 meetings. There's also huge concerns about the Trump International Hotel and have been for years in D.C. World leaders frequently stay there, and Attorney General William Barr is holding a $30,000 private party there. A recent nonpartisan study shows Trump hotels have raked in $20 million in business from political groups, including the Trump campaign, since he started running it in 2015. Then, of course, the latest controversy over Air Force flight crews staying at Trump's hotel in Scotland while they stopped to refuel. Just yesterday, the president saying he had nothing to do with that.
When a plane stops at a massive international airport and gets fuel, I don't own the airport. When pilots stay, I own a lot of different places. Soon you'll find that out. Because I'll be at some point prior to the election, I'm going to be giving out a financial report of me. And it'll be extremely complete. I'm going to give out my financial condition, and you'll be extremely shocked that the numbers are many, many times what you think. I don't need to have somebody take a room overnight at a hotel.
Times, however, reporting that the Trump organization and Donald himself negotiated a deal that would help fill rooms in the hotel with Air Force personnel. Those negotiations, they began in 2014. Times saying government records show Trump had a direct role in forming a partnership with the airport that would get Turnberry added to the list of hotels in the area. The U.S. government would use that hotel, even though it is 20 miles away and much farther than other places to stay. Now, there have been concerns about Trump and his businesses ever since he's won the election. Past presidents, as you know, they've used blind trust to handle their affairs. But the president's trust, it is controlled by his family, so not a stretch to believe he is in the loop about what is going on. My next guest was an anti-corruption expert in the Justice Department's fraud section until she resigned over the administration's ethical issues. We're now joined by Hui Chen. Hui, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard, for having me.
You know, before we get to the specifics, and I will get to in a minute, I think it's interesting to try to get to how the president views this and the prism he looks at it in. And I went into some of the comments that he had said when the issue of emoluments came up. And he said, among other things, and I'm quoting directly, quote, "I got sued on a thing called emoluments. Emoluments. You ever heard of the word? Nobody ever heard of it before. What it is presidential harassment because this thing is costing me a fortune. This thing is costing me a fortune being president." Earlier in the program, I talked about how the founding fathers never could have envisioned, I think, a Donald Trump situation as it is, where the Constitution is one thing, the law is something different. But the idea of self-enriching yourself as a president and the president openly being frustrated where his ability to make a buck off the office is getting in the way, forget about all the real consequential problems. The framework isn't really there to curtail that if the president doesn't choose to be transparent. Am I oversimplifying it?
Not at all. I think you're absolutely right. The framers of the Constitution never envisioned a situation as we're facing today, where you have a president who completely blurs the line between the office of the presidency of the United States and his own personal properties and fortunes and businesses. So he's using his properties as open coffer for people to earn favors with him. And also he's using the office of the presidency of the United States to brand his properties.
The idea that the Justice Department, and obviously this troubled you enough that you left, But the Justice Department is considered by many now, especially given Barr's handling of the Mueller report and so many other things that have gone on, and even the optics of choosing to go to the Trump property for a private event and 30 grand out of his own pocket. How troubling is it to you that the one place that's supposed to fairly call balls and strikes is seen as something almost in the way of getting to the bottom of what's going on and to fairly say right and wrong?
It is extremely troubling. One of the things I've always been very proud of as a former U.S. prosecutor is that when I'm overseas and people ask me about political influences in prosecutorial decisions, up until this presidency, I had always been able to proudly say, no, it's never a consideration. Politics don't come into our decision making as prosecutors. We are law enforcement officers. That seems to no longer be the case, certainly from a number of decisions that's been made since Barr has taken office. And that's deeply troubling to an institution that has a proud history of being an impartial law enforcement agency.
Well, you know, I got to admit, around this table, we discuss politics, and we've got elected officials, strategists, and everything else in between. And a lot of folks said, oh, you know, move ahead with impeachment proceedings. And I said, you know, there's a fatigue in this country that I'm not so sure that's necessarily the right way to go. But taking the politics out of it, if you can, it almost has to fall to Congress to get to the bottom of this, because you're not going to have a Justice Department that will independently investigate this. The law, as we went over earlier, isn't clear as to where they can go necessarily on this as well. It really has to be Congress and their investigative powers to pursue this or not. Am I wrong, or is there another platform other than maybe, let's say, the Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation in New York State and the state AG or even the Southern District getting involved? For now, it kind of has to fall to Congress.
The way our Constitution has set up the system, it definitely has envisioned a Congress that would take responsibilities of holding the president, the executive branch, accountable. So that is the presumption that we have in our system. I think we, at this point, are looking at a situation where Congress seems still unable to fully step up to its responsibilities. There are also, realistically, we can't take politics out of the equation. So there's a lot of political factors in play. And I think right now we have a serious question for the very nature of our democracy, which is how do we hold the president of the United States accountable for things that ordinary citizens and your average government employees, that if they had committed to any of these things, they would certainly get in trouble. They would be expected to be held accountable. So why should we not have a system where the president can be equally held accountable for things that he's done? That's not in our nation's interest. That's a violation of government ethics. And that's, frankly, in some cases, violation of his oath.
And I want to stick that last point for a second, because I didn't want to get in the weeds on this, but Mike Pence stayed 180 miles from the Dublin location. It's crazy that anyone would have stayed there, and obviously it was a Trump property. With the Air Force story that I just reported in Scotland, there's documentation to say the president completely knew about it years earlier right now, and there totally was more affordable locations and other things that could have avoided even the perception of it. This does not happen in normal administrations. They don't even come within the area code way of even the perception of impropriety. I mean, just give an idea of how completely bizarro the situations one after another that happened, let alone a president saying, hey, come over to my place for a G7.
This is, you know, we have entered a whole new era of disregard for ethics and disregard for facts. The fact that these kind of news are coming out every other day or every day, and it doesn't seem to trouble people the way that they should, is deeply alarming for a nation that prides itself for the rule of law.
Hui Chen, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, everybody, when we come back, as the president's poll numbers continue to plummet, he's ramping up his attacks on the 2020 Democrats. We're going to take a look at not only where the race stands right now, but also as we get closer to the next Democratic debate, what we may expect come Thursday night.